Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. If you missed our video before this one about the 6-liter here, you might want to check it out. We did the surfacing of the block here and cleaned it all up and everything like that. We have some lint-free towels coming so that we can wipe that all down. And we're going to use the lint-free towels for pretty much everything on this build once we start putting everything back together. So we'll be re-cleaning everything. But if you missed the video on surfacing the block with the stone, I highly suggest checking it out if you're curious about blocking your deck here and not sending your engine off to the machine shop. But anyway, today we're going to be taking off the oil pan. Now, we ordered an oil pan for this. We originally had a used one that we were going to put on, and upon further inspection of that oil pan, it turned out that it's not exactly perfect. So I'm going through all this, and we don't want to be spending an arm and a leg on this engine, but we want it to be right. And because it's in the van, it's a lot more difficult to pull out than say in a truck, because the van's full of stuff. It's not exactly an easy feat. You got 14 bolts instead of 6 or 8 to get the whole body off of a pickup truck. So we're just going to put a brand new oil pan on this. It's on the way. Now, typically you would roll this thing all the way upside down, but we don't want to roll it too far here because we don't want any of the contaminants that we did wash down to roll back around and end up coming back out the top of the block. So we don't want to do that. So we're going to be doing it this way. We're going to roll it to this side and take this side off, roll it to the other side, take the other side off. And then once we get the oil pan off, then I'll go ahead and roll it all the way around to get the bed plate off. But I know that there's oil and everything else in the pan, just stuff that has washed down or oil we dumped down into the holes, just contaminated oil. We don't want floating all around, back up inside to the crank or anything like that. So we're just going to pull this oil pan off of here, and hopefully we don't have too much damage inside from whenever that shop crushed the oil pan for us. So hopefully we don't have any problems there, but we're going to find out. So we have a bunch of 8mm bolts here around the oil pan, so we're just going to start buzzing them off. So in the middle on the back, we have longer ones. Okay, so as you go around here, so far all of them have been the same length except for the ones in the middle and the back. So make sure that you take note of where these go. So that would be in the area right around here of the back of the oil pan. So these front ones here are also long. And that one ended up being a short one here. So these three are long, and that one ended up being short. So now we just got to roll this the other way, and we'll get the other side off.
Down to our last bolt here.
I'm going to leave that bolt in there just a little bit. That way we can pull down on this pan. So we got our oil pan off of here, and doesn't look like our pickup tube has been damaged. So that's very, very good. So we'll just get this guy off to the side here and get this gasket off and get it flipped around. So we have the oil pan here. You can see we didn't have any abnormal rubbing up in the oil pan from the pickup tube, which is great. However, this pan is not savable due to the way it's bent, but you never know what you're going to find in an oil pan. We have some plastic stuff here, which looks like it might be something from the glow plugs. So that's what I'm assuming all of this is. We don't see any signs of needle bearings or shiny material in here. Nothing that's worrisome other than the fact that this maybe looks like the glow plug harness here. So we have the square pieces, or the square plastic pieces, really big and bulky, and then we have a connector here and a little piece of tin there. So assuming that this is part of the glow plug harness, somebody probably removed it at some point and it broke, and it just ended up finding its way down into the oil pan. So that's not a bad thing. Could be a lot worse in here, but let's go ahead and get this engine flipped around here and get that bed plate off. So upon further inspection here, you can see that our pickup tube is completely damaged and compromised, and we have some more plastic inside there. So the screen was definitely doing its job, and these definitely look like a glow plug harness. So we're definitely gonna have to pull that pickup tube off of there. I think I have another one here, so if not, we'll have to get a new one of these, because that is definitely a drain plug bolt. So yeah, that is not a good thing. It's never a good thing. So if you have a shop working on your engine, make sure they don't smash your oil pan, because that's kind of a problem. And to give you an idea of how deviated that really is, you can see how bad that really is. So if you're not sure where the longer bolts go, if you look, you'll see that some of these bolts are tapped and some of them are like a pass through. So the bolt would go through the bolt to the block. So that would be this one, this one, this one, and then the back two in the middle here. But everything else, all the other oil pan bolts actually bolt to the plate itself. So if you're not sure where those long bolts came from or go to, this is where they would go. So there's only going to be 5 long ones, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then at this point, when you reassemble this, you can just take a good look at this, and it'll give you a reminder as to which ones get the longer bolts here. So we just have a couple 8mm bolts that hold this on. I'm going to remove the pickup tube first, because we're going to be changing it out anyway. And then we can go ahead and remove this plate and see what we got underneath. So there is an O-ring on that, which is expected. All these bolts are the same length. So that should be everything that's holding this on. So now we just got to get it off of here, which you can see is very, very simple to do. Now, with that being said, you can now see the whole bottom end of this engine here. Now, the gasket for this is on the plate. So we're just going to give this a good wipe here and make sure that we don't have any debris fall in. So I will probably wipe this while it's upside down or right side up so that I don't get any dirt intrusion from the outside edge of this block, which is extremely possible. But looking down inside here, we don't see any issues. Everything looks to be good. No funny looking anything. You can see the cam down through here where it rides on the lifters, and it doesn't look to be bad just by looking down through there and glancing at everything. So we got everything cleaned off of here. We're going to give it a good quick wipe here to make sure there's nothing else on here with our lint-free towel here. And before we put this upper oil pan on, we actually did the bed plate. So we removed the bed plate and put new main bearings in here. So that's another video. We're not going to cover that in this video. So this is basically just going to be your upper oil pan and oil pan reseal. So we're going to go ahead, give this a quick wipe here, and start getting our upper oil pan bolted on and torqued down. So basically, we just want a nice clean surface here. We're not too worried about preparation because we're not going to be doing any RTV on this gasket. Now we have the upper oil pan here, and all of the bolts are already in here, and we already have our gasket on the bottom here. So we're going to go ahead and drop this thing on here. Now the reason I left the bolts in the pan here is because I don't want to risk dropping them down into the engine. So as long as we set this down on here nicely and in its proper spot, these bolts aren't going to go flying out of here. So we're going to go ahead and get these tightened down and get them torqued. So these get torqued to 10 foot-pounds. Now there is no sequence for this, but I started in the middle and worked my way out. I'm just going to double check these. Now we also previously installed our oil pickup tube here, and it gets installed the same way. There is an O-ring on here. This pickup tube will only go one way. So we used our silicone lubricating grease for the O-ring, installed it on the pickup, and torqued it down to spec. So these are also supposed to be 10 foot-pounds. Now with all of that done, we're going to give this surface a quick wipe again, and then we're going to go ahead and put our new O-ring gasket in. So we previously cleaned this plate in the parts washer, so that is my suggestion. And then you want to make sure that all these grooves are nice and clean. So now we're going to go ahead and put the gasket in, and then we can start putting our oil pan on. So we have our gasket here. There is a locating dot on this O-ring gasket, and there's just a little spot there, and that is in the front corner on this side. So basically we're just going to put this guy on here and start with our locating dot. So we have our locating dot here, and we're just going to start by pushing this into all of the pre-molded areas here. Now you don't want to run your finger down like this to put the gasket in, because as you do that, you can see that the gasket gets longer, so it doesn't fit into the recesses. So you always want to make sure you start with your recessed areas and get them started. And then what you want to do is you actually just want to push this gasket down in. So once we have all of our pre-molded or areas here, just start working your way around the gasket by pushing it down in and making sure that there's nothing sticking out, and make sure that there's no twists or deviations in the gasket. So we have our gasket all put on here. And then if anybody's watched any of my other videos about installing oil pans, so we have our new oil pan here. This is direct from Ford. You always have to check this flange for straightness, especially whenever you're doing like a 7.3 where it's glued on. This one has a slight bend in the flange here, obviously from being in the box and being thrown around, because, you know, nobody knows how to handle boxes. But anyway, so we have to straighten this flange back out because these only get torqued to 10 foot-pounds as well. And we're not going to be grinding any of this surface off of here because we're not going to be using RTV on this pan. This is just an O-ring gasket pan, so the surface on this is fine. We just need to make sure that this flange here is flat, which it is currently not flat. So we got our flange flattened back out, and basically what I do is use the dead blow and on a block of wood or a hard flat surface and try to get this massaged back flat, and then I'll lay it on something flat and just make sure that it's not bent anymore. Now, we need to remember which bolts are our long bolts here. So we have our long bolt, a long bolt, and then the first three over here are long bolts. So this just sets on here. We can start putting our bolts in, and you can see which ones are the long bolts through the actual oil pan because you won't see any threads into the upper oil pan here. So we're going to go ahead and get started with putting our long bolts in first, and then we'll start putting the short bolts in. So before we start putting our short bolts in, now we are dealing with dissimilar metals again. So a lot of these bolts are protected. However, some of them are open. So the ones on the side here are open to corrosion and grime. Now, I'm not going to be using a lot. I basically just want a little bit of anti-seize on these threads. And the only reason I'm doing this is because these are dissimilar metals. This will help prevent any corrosion inside these threads. And we're just using a very tiny bit of this anti-seize because we do not want this to come loose. However, we just don't want it to corrode. Now that we have all these bolts in, I'm just going to wind them in with the impact. I'm not going to be tightening them with it. So this one's tight. Now the reason this one's tight is because this one had some corrosion in the threads. And that is where the anti-seize comes in handy. I didn't want to tap these threads because they are just aluminum. Could have tapped those if I really wanted to, or thread chased them, and I just didn't do it on this one. So if you really are having corrosion issues, make sure that you chase the threads in your upper oil pan. So now we're going to go ahead and torque all of these down to 10 foot-pounds. I usually just start in one spot and go around, and then I'll go around it one more time. So we're just going to go ahead and torque these down. So that's your oil pan. So we did our upper oil pan and our oil pan in this video here. The torque specs are very important. Lubrication is very important. And corrosion is a pain in the butt. So whenever you're doing your upper oil pan or your lower oil pan and your 6-liter, you want to make sure that you follow these steps. And I know that this is a very simple process, but a lot of people try to overlook it. And if you over torque these bolts or mis torque them or torque them indifferently or differently, you could get an O-ring that doesn't seat correctly and you may end up with a leak. So it's very important to follow the torque values whenever you're dealing with O-ring gaskets, because you don't want to smash the gasket or warp the flange, because this flange needs to be flat all the way around. So hopefully this will help you guys out, and I appreciate you watching, and hopefully we can get some more of these videos up for you and show you that anybody can really work on this stuff as long as you have the tools and the knowledge. So thanks for watching, guys, and we'll catch you on the next one.